Sergeant Maria Santos had always known the military was a man's world, but she never expected to face what happened that scorching Tuesday morning at Fort Harrison. The sun was barely climbing over the horizon when she arrived at the training ground, her boots hitting the dusty earth with the same determination that had carried her through 8 years of service. Maria was different from most soldiers at the base. She stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, but her presence commanded respect from everyone around her. Born in a small town in Texas, she had joined the Army at 18 after her father, a veteran himself, encouraged her to serve her country. What her father didn't know was that his daughter would face challenges he never had to endure. The morning started like any other. Maria was leading a group of new recruits through their physical training when Colonel Bradley Richardson approached the training area. Richardson was known throughout the base as a man with old-fashioned ideas about women in the military. At 52 years old, he had served for 30 years and believed that combat roles should remain exclusively for men. The recruits, 282 soldiers in total, were spread across the massive training ground. Some were doing push-ups, others were running obstacle courses, and a few were practicing combat techniques. Maria moved between the groups, offering guidance and correction with the skill of someone who had mastered every aspect of military training. Colonel Richardson had been watching Maria for several minutes when he decided to intervene. He disagreed with her training methods and felt that a woman had no business instructing soldiers who might one day face real combat. His face was red with anger as he marched toward her, his heavy boots creating small clouds of dust with each step. "Sergeant Santos," Richardson called out, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. The nearby soldiers immediately stopped their activities, sensing the tension in their commanding officer's voice. Maria turned to face him, maintaining her military posture despite the obvious hostility in his approach. "Yes, sir," Maria responded, her voice steady and professional. She had dealt with difficult superior officers before, but something about Richardson's demeanor this morning felt different, more dangerous than usual. Richardson stopped just inches from Maria's face, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath and see the anger burning in his eyes. "I've been watching your methods, Sergeant, and I don't like what I see. These soldiers need real training, not whatever soft approach you think passes for military instruction." The accusation stung, but Maria kept her emotions in check. She had worked harder than most of her male counterparts to prove herself worthy of her position. Her training methods had consistently produced some of the best soldiers on the base, and her superiors had praised her work on multiple occasions. "Sir, my training methods follow standard military protocol and have been approved by," Maria began, but Richardson cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Don't quote protocol to me, Sergeant. I've been in this army since before you were born, and I know what real soldiers need. What they need is discipline, something you clearly don't understand." The other soldiers continued their exercises, but many were stealing glances at the confrontation unfolding before them. Some of the recruits had grown to respect Maria during their weeks of training, and they could sense that something was seriously wrong with this situation. Richardson's anger seemed to be building with each passing second. He had clearly come to the training ground with the intention of asserting his authority over Maria, but her calm professionalism was only making him more frustrated. In his mind, she should have been intimidated by his rank and years of service. "Furthermore," Richardson continued, his voice rising, "I think it's time this base returned to proper military standards. Women like you have no business training combat soldiers, and I intend to make sure that changes starting today." Maria felt her heart rate increase, but she maintained her composure. She had faced discrimination before, but never so directly and publicly. The safety of her position suddenly felt uncertain, and she realized that Richardson might have the power to end her military career with a few well-placed recommendations. "Sir, I respectfully disagree with your assessment. My training record speaks for itself, and I have never received anything but positive evaluations from my commanding officers," Maria replied, her voice remaining steady despite the growing tension. Richardson's face grew even redder, and several veins became visible on his forehead. He was not accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone he viewed as beneath him in every way that mattered. The fact that Maria was maintaining her dignity in front of so many soldiers was making him look weak, and he knew it. Your training record doesn't mean anything to me, Sergeant. What matters is that you're not fit for this position. And I'm going to make sure everyone on this base knows it." The threat was clear, and Maria understood that Richardson was prepared to use his rank to destroy her reputation and career. She also realized that backing down now would only encourage him to continue his harassment of her and potentially other female soldiers on the base. "Colonel Richardson, I believe you're making a mistake. My soldiers respect me because I've earned that respect through dedication and competence, not because of my gender." Richardson's anger reached a boiling point. In his mind, Maria's continued resistance was an act of insubordination that demanded immediate and decisive action. He had always believed that women in the military needed to be reminded of their place, and he decided that this was the perfect moment to deliver that lesson. The 282 soldiers scattered across the training ground were now openly watching the confrontation. Many had stopped their exercises entirely, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The morning air was thick with tension, and everyone present could feel that the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. Richardson took another step closer to Maria, invading her personal space in a way that was clearly intended to intimidate her. His hands were clenched into fists, and his breathing was becoming more labored as his anger continued to build. "Sergeant Santos, you will learn to respect your superiors, or you will find yourself facing serious consequences. I will not tolerate this kind of insubordination from anyone, especially not from someone like you." Maria knew that she was at a crossroads. She could back down and allow Richardson to humiliate her in front of nearly 300 soldiers, potentially ending any respect she had earned during her years of service. Or she could continue to stand her ground and face whatever consequences Richardson might impose. She chose to maintain her dignity. The moment that would change everything happened so quickly that most of the soldiers didn't immediately understand what they had witnessed. Colonel Richardson, his face now purple with rage, suddenly raised his right hand and swung it toward Maria's face, with the clear intention of striking her across the cheek. Maria's military training kicked in faster than conscious thought. Years of combat preparation and self-defense instruction had honed her reflexes to lightning speed. As Richardson's hand moved toward her, time seemed to slow down. She could see the hatred in his eyes, feel the displacement of air as his palm approached her face, and hear the collective intake of breath from the soldiers who realized what was about to happen. In one fluid motion, Maria caught Richardson's wrist with her left hand, twisted her body to the right, and used the colonel's own momentum against him. The technique was something she had practiced thousands of times during her martial arts training, but she had never imagined using it on a superior officer in front of hundreds of witnesses. Richardson's arm bent at an unnatural angle as Maria applied pressure to his wrist and elbow simultaneously. The sound that followed was unmistakable. A sharp crack that echoed across the training ground as the colonel's forearm broke just above his wrist. The bone snapped cleanly, and Richardson let out a scream that was part pain and part shock at what had just occurred. The colonel dropped to his knees instantly, cradling his broken arm against his chest. His face, which had been red with anger moments before, was now pale with pain and disbelief. He looked up at Maria with an expression that mixed agony with complete surprise that she had been capable of such decisive action. The silence that followed was deafening. 282 soldiers stood frozen in place, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Never in their military experience had they seen an enlisted soldier physically defend themselves against a commanding officer, regardless of the circumstances that led to the confrontation. Maria remained standing in the same position, her breathing steady but her heart pounding. She knew that her military career was likely over, but she also knew that she had acted in self-defense when faced with an unprovoked attack from a superior officer. The decision had been made in a split second, but she did not regret protecting herself. Sergeant First Class David Chen, who had been training nearby, was the first to break the shocked silence. He had served under Maria for 2 years and had witnessed the entire confrontation from beginning to end. Chen immediately began moving toward Richardson while calling for medical assistance. "We need a medic over here now," Chen shouted, his voice carrying across the training ground. Several soldiers immediately began running toward the base medical facility, while others started forming a protective circle around the colonel, who was still on his knees clutching his injured arm. Private Jessica Wong, one of the newest recruits, had been standing close enough to hear most of the conversation between Maria and Richardson. She would later tell investigators that the colonel had clearly been the aggressor and that Sergeant Santos had only acted to protect herself when Richardson attempted to strike her. As the medics arrived and began treating Richardson's broken arm, whispers began spreading throughout the assembled soldiers. Many of them had served under Maria and respected her leadership and fairness. They had witnessed Richardson's hostile approach and aggressive behavior, and several were already discussing what they had seen. Captain Robert Hayes, the officer responsible for overseeing training operations, arrived at the scene within minutes of being notified about the incident. Hayes had worked with both Richardson and Maria on previous occasions and was known for his fair and thorough approach to handling difficult situations. Hayes immediately began separating witnesses and taking preliminary statements about what had occurred. The accounts were remarkably consistent. Richardson had approached Maria aggressively, made threatening statements about her position and capabilities, invaded her personal space, and then attempted to strike her across the face before she defended herself. Maria stood at attention while Hayes conducted his initial investigation, answering questions clearly and honestly about her actions. She explained that she had felt threatened by Richardson's behavior and had acted instinctively to protect herself when he attempted to assault her. Sergeant Santos, "You understand the gravity of this situation," Hayes said, his tone professional but not unsympathetic. "Regardless of the circumstances, you have physically injured a superior officer, and there will need to be a full investigation." "Yes, sir, I understand completely," Maria replied. "I acted in self-defense when Colonel Richardson attempted to strike me, and I'm prepared to face whatever consequences result from my actions." Richardson was transported to the base hospital, where doctors confirmed that he had suffered a clean break of both the radius and ulna bones in his forearm. The injury would require surgery and several months of rehabilitation, during which time he would be unable to perform his regular duties. News of the incident spread rapidly throughout Fort Harrison. Within hours, everyone on the base knew that Sergeant Maria Santos had broken Colonel Richardson's arm after he attempted to strike her during a training session. The story grew and changed as it passed from person to person, but the core facts remained consistent. Some of the older, more traditional officers expressed concern about the precedent that Maria's actions might set. They worried that enlisted personnel might feel empowered to physically confront their superiors whenever they disagreed with orders or felt disrespected. These officers believed that military discipline required absolute obedience to rank, regardless of personal feelings or circumstances. However, many of the younger officers and enlisted personnel supported Maria's actions. They had either served under her directly or heard about her reputation for fairness and competence. These soldiers believed that Richardson had crossed a line when he attempted to assault Maria, and that she had every right to defend herself. The female soldiers on the base were particularly interested in the outcome of the investigation. Many of them had faced various forms of harassment or discrimination during their military service, though rarely as blatant as what Maria had experienced. They saw her actions as a symbol of standing up against abuse of power and gender-based mistreatment. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the highest-ranking woman on the base, privately supported Maria, but knew that she had to be careful about how she expressed her views. Mitchell had faced her own challenges rising through the military ranks, and understood the delicate balance that women in the service had to maintain between asserting themselves and avoiding being labeled as troublemakers. As the day progressed, witness statements were collected from dozens of soldiers who had been present during the incident. The accounts painted a clear picture of Richardson as the aggressor and Maria as someone who had acted in self-defense when faced with an unprovoked attack. Private Marcus Johnson, who had been standing less than 20 feet away, told investigators that Richardson had been acting crazy angry and that everyone could see he was about to hit Sergeant Santos. Johnson's statement was typical of the accounts provided by other witnesses. The base commander, Brigadier General Patricia Williams, was briefed on the incident within hours of its occurrence. Williams had a reputation for being tough but fair, and she understood the complex implications of the situation. She knew that her decision about how to handle the matter would be closely watched by everyone on the base and could set important precedents for future cases. Williams ordered a complete investigation to be conducted by the military police, with assistance from the Judge Advocate General's office. She wanted every aspect of the incident thoroughly examined before any decisions were made about potential disciplinary action or charges. As evening approached, Maria remained in temporary detention pending the completion of the investigation. She was not formally charged with any crime, but military protocol required that she be isolated until the facts of the case could be fully established. The investigation into the incident between Sergeant Maria Santos and Colonel Bradley Richardson took exactly 72 hours to complete. During that time, military police interviewed every soldier who had witnessed the confrontation, reviewed Maria's service record, and examined Richardson's history of interactions with female personnel. What they discovered painted a troubling picture of Colonel Richardson's behavior toward women in the military. 7 different female soldiers came forward during the investigation to report instances where Richardson had made inappropriate comments about their capabilities, questioned their fitness for military service, or created hostile working environments through his actions and attitudes. Staff Sergeant Linda Rodriguez revealed that Richardson had told her 6 months earlier that women should stick to administrative roles and leave the real military work to men. Corporal Amy Chen reported that the colonel had repeatedly undermined her authority when she was leading training exercises, making comments loud enough for other soldiers to hear about how women couldn't handle the pressure of military leadership. The most damaging testimony came from Captain Jennifer Walsh, who had served under Richardson's command at a previous base. Walsh testified that Richardson had a pattern of targeting female officers and enlisted personnel, creating situations designed to make them appear incompetent or unsuitable for their positions. She described his behavior as systematic harassment, disguised as military discipline. Military investigators also discovered that Richardson had received 2 informal counseling sessions in the past year regarding his interactions with female personnel. These sessions had been conducted quietly, without official documentation, in an apparent attempt to address his behavior without damaging his military career. The medical examination of Richardson's injury confirmed that Maria had used minimal force necessary to stop his attack. The emergency room physician who treated the colonel stated that the break was consistent with a defensive maneuver rather than an aggressive assault. The doctor noted that someone with Maria's training could have caused much more severe injuries if her intent had been to harm rather than simply defend herself. Video footage from security cameras positioned around the training ground provided additional evidence supporting the witness accounts. While the cameras were too distant to capture audio of the conversation, they clearly showed Richardson approaching Maria aggressively, invading her personal space, and initiating the physical contact that led to his injury. The footage also showed that Maria had immediately stepped back after defending herself and had made no attempt to continue the physical confrontation. Her body language throughout the incident was consistent with someone who was defending themselves rather than someone looking for a fight. On the 3rd day of the investigation, Brigadier General Williams made her decision. She called Maria into her office for a private meeting that would determine the sergeant's future in the military. Williams was known for her direct communication style, and she wasted no time in addressing the situation. "Sergeant Santos, I've reviewed the complete investigation file, and I want you to know that you acted appropriately given the circumstances you faced," Williams began. "Colonel Richardson's behavior was unacceptable and violated both military regulations and basic standards of professional conduct." Maria felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she remained at attention while the general continued her explanation. "However, I also need you to understand that this incident has created a complicated situation for everyone involved. The military chain of command depends on respect for rank and authority, but it also depends on officers conducting themselves in a manner worthy of that respect." Williams explained that Richardson would face a formal reprimand for his conduct and would be transferred to a desk position where his interactions with enlisted personnel would be limited. The colonel would also be required to undergo counseling and sensitivity training before being considered for any future leadership roles. "As for you, Sergeant Santos, you will receive no disciplinary action. The investigation clearly shows that you acted in self-defense when faced with an unprovoked assault by a superior officer. Your service record is exemplary, and multiple witnesses testified to your professionalism throughout this entire incident." The news that Maria would face no consequences for her actions spread quickly throughout Fort Harrison. Many of the soldiers who had witnessed the incident felt vindicated in their support for her actions. They had seen Richardson's aggressive behavior and believed that Maria had done exactly what any soldier should do when faced with an unprovoked attack. The case became a talking point throughout the military community, with discussions taking place at bases around the world. Some traditionalists criticized the decision not to discipline Maria, arguing that it set a dangerous precedent that could undermine military authority. However, the majority of military personnel supported the ruling, seeing it as a victory for justice and appropriate self-defense. Female soldiers across the armed forces took particular notice of the case. For many, it represented a turning point in how the military would handle situations where male officers abused their authority to intimidate or harass women in service. The fact that Maria had been supported rather than punished sent a clear message that such behavior would not be tolerated. 3 months after the incident, Colonel Richardson submitted his retirement papers and left the military after 30 years of service. His departure was quiet, with no ceremony or recognition typical of a retiring officer of his rank. Those who knew about the investigation understood that his early retirement was likely the best outcome he could have hoped for given the circumstances. Maria continued her service at Fort Harrison, where she was eventually promoted to staff sergeant and given additional responsibilities for training female recruits. Her reputation as a fair but firm instructor grew, and she became known as someone who would stand up for what was right, regardless of the potential consequences. The 282 soldiers who witnessed the incident carried the story with them throughout their military careers. Many would later tell others about the day they saw Sergeant Maria Santos defend herself against an abusive colonel, and how the military justice system ultimately supported her actions. Years later, when Maria was asked about that morning on the training ground, she would say that she never regretted her decision to defend herself. She had joined the military to serve her country with honor and dignity, and she refused to allow anyone to take that dignity away from her, regardless of their rank or position. The incident became part of military training programs designed to educate officers about appropriate conduct and the importance of maintaining professional relationships with all personnel, regardless of gender. Maria's actions were cited as an example of appropriate self-defense in the face of unprovoked aggression. The legacy of that 72-hour investigation extended far beyond Fort Harrison. It demonstrated that the military was capable of evolving and adapting its standards of conduct to ensure that all personnel, regardless of gender, could serve with dignity and respect. It showed that rank and authority came with responsibilities, not just privileges, and that those who abused their positions would face consequences. Maria Santos continued to serve her country for another 12 years before retiring with full honors. She had proven that courage comes in many forms, and sometimes the most important battles are fought not on foreign battlefields, but in the everyday struggle to maintain dignity and justice in the face of those who would abuse their power. The training ground at Fort Harrison still operates today, with new recruits learning the same skills and disciplines that Maria once taught. The story of what happened that Tuesday morning serves as a reminder that standing up for what is right, even when facing overwhelming odds, is sometimes the most important duty a soldier can perform.